Hello.
Hey, what's up, man?
Oh dear, I can't hear you. That's not good.
You can't hear me?
Hmm, problematic.
Uh,
Do. One moment. Oh, the problem. Okay, gonna try a backup plan. Hold on. Shut that down. Can you hear me now? I can hear you. Can you hear me?
yes. You
Okay,
got me?
great.
Perfect.
Yeah, I was trying to do some tech tests and things, and it failed basically. So, oh well. I'll have to come back to that another time. All right. So our topic today, should we allow a computer to govern us, was inspired by the fact that I'm interested in government theory and also kind of fascinated with artificial intelligence. So when these topics emerge, we get this kind of discussion. It's a question I don't have a clear answer for. It's just something I wanted to consider. So a good topic for debate and discussion, I figured, because it's kind of a nice way to explore these things. I'm going to lay out a little bit of a case for yes, we should, just because I think that's a good starting point. And then I've got a whole bunch of different possibilities of why we shouldn't. But I invite you to kind of come up with ones on either side as we go. Do you want to talk at all about kind of the meaning of the resolution before we get started?
Yeah, sure. I had in my mind sort of, I don't want to get too much into my argument, but I guess just a distinction between the execution of government and the sort of the ought of what government should do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have that in the back of my mind when I make my case, with both ways that we should do it and ways that I wouldn't feel comfortable, powers I
Right.
wouldn't feel comfortable ceding to a computer. But go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, about the same way. It's a fungible area. To me, it just generally means taking artificial intelligence in some way and using it to make government decisions that are, to some degree at least, binding. If we simply have AIs that advise members of Congress or something like that, then it's not really governance, right? It would just be a source of input for information, and then they make their own decisions. This would be, in some way, allowing the system to make a binding decision of some kind or another that, by law, we are bound to obey or follow so long as that law persists, right? So that's the only distinction I want to make, just that it has to have some actual power for this to be very meaningful. Otherwise, it's just a question of, should we use computers to help us make decisions? And I think the answer to that is almost always, yeah, sure, why not? Um, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So here's an outline of the for argument. And again, I'm not specifically advocating this. I just want to establish it as a baseline. So it's based on a few different observations. Among the goals we have for government are fairness and impartiality, adherence to the law, accuracy and competence, and rational decision making. These aren't the only values, but they're kind of the ones that are relevant for this case. So among the problems that we sometimes observe in government are political corruption, which is policy only for popular electoral approval. Basically, you're only doing it so that you get elected again, not because you think it's a wise decision. Personal corruption, aka policy that is only for self-interest of the politician or their inner circle. Irrationality, making decisions based on fear, anger, or stupidity, that kind of thing, in a way that's, again, not rational. Sometimes it makes sense. You're afraid of something because it poses a real danger. That's not what we're talking about. And bias and favoritism based on sex, gender, income, social group. Run down the gamut of things that people think we're biased for based on our own identities, right? So we observe that the capabilities of AI systems are growing steadily. Thus, it is plausible that one day they could make political decisions, or now or in the near future. In the near future. If you haven't been following these things, AIs can now soundly defeat humans in just about any game of rational thinking. The strongest AI chess master crushes human opponents now. And recently, they created a Go program. Go is kind of it's a Chinese game that has always been considered to be more difficult for a computer to understand than chess. The myriad of possibilities in strategy, and the computer Go masters utterly crush human Go masters now. So that's going on. They're capable of performing a wide range of specific tasks better than humans are. Half of the world's 10 most valuable companies are deeply invested in AI research. Amazon, Google, Apple, Microsoft, all deeply in the AI game because they see kind of the capabilities that are coming soon. In 2014, we saw our first AI installed as a member of a board of directors. I think it's a company in Hong Kong. It's an medical investment company. So they put the AI on the board so that it could make binding decisions. It doesn't run the board. It's just one member out of 9. So it could be overruled, but it does cast a binding vote in making decisions for the company. I don't know if any more, it got a lot of press when that happened. I don't know if any more have done this, but a lot of financial institutions heavily base their decision-making on AI algorithms that analyze the markets and decide what the best course of action is. So AI, next observation, AIs have some useful qualities for addressing the government problems that we talked about before. They don't have emotional or social biases unless we program them to. All these are true unless we program them to. They don't have personal motivations or interests, so they're immune to personal corruption. They make entirely rational decisions. That isn't to say they can't make mistakes if they have bad data, but their decisions are always based on a purely rational analysis. And they only make decisions based on electoral chances if we designed them to. So generally they wouldn't. You could, I say that because in theory you could design an AI that tries to get elected again, right? You know, it's very good at getting elected somehow. That might be a useful trait for them to have, but generally speaking, they wouldn't make those kinds of decisions.
You're talking about Mitt Romney, yeah?
Right, yeah. Romney bot 5,000, yeah. Okay, so that's my case for it. It's just basically saying there are some problems that we see in politics that an AI could solve in some respect. What do you think about the case? Do you have anything that you would add to it or subtract for it before we get into kind of direct refutation or a different case?
Sure. So where I envision AI or computing, where I would like to see it is in the execution of government. A lot of the ways that we interact with our government on a day-to-day basis, our local government, our state government, on up to our federal government, aren't really like super difficult decisions. It's going and it's renewing your driver's license, for example, paying your water bill, that sort of thing. And where I would like to see more just computing in general is eliminating bureaucracy. So I like my major in college right now, it's philosophy, but my minor is actually computer science. And I understand you're a software engineer. So yeah. I think we're both coming at it with, you much more than me. So some knowledge of what goes into this. But for example, if you're applying for a specific benefit, we can almost look at it as a Boolean, right? If you meet certain requirements, then you get this benefit. How we execute that now, or you could backtrack a little bit. If you meet this requirement, then you have this obligation. How we do it now is with a massive bureaucratic state, which is highly inefficient, and nobody likes to go stand in line in the DMV. Whereas if we sort of turn that over to computers that are cycling at millions and billions of times per second, it would vastly improve our lives. Not to mention data redundancy in the government is insane. Sure. If we created some sort of streamlined profile that all state, local, and the federal government could all draw from, if you don't have to prove your residence when you're applying for health insurance, for example, or when you're going to renew your license, I think that would be a phenomenal thing. Vastly improve people's lives, vastly improve government itself and how people perceive government. That was the crux of my pro case, and where I felt most strongly that AI, and I do feel like this is governments. This is the AI or the computer handing out benefits, executing the function of government, especially in the ways that sort of most people interact with government.
Sure. So
Pass it back to you.
yeah, I guess in the in the dev biz we'd call these expert systems or data driven decision making systems where they've got a fixed algorithm, set of methodologies they run through in order to adjudicate a particular piece of information. They just fill out a form, provide it to them. So I guess and we have a lot of that already that exists. I would say based on the amount of funding available for government to implement these kinds of systems. Sometimes your local DMV office may not have the funds to put together an automated system for applying for a driver's license, right? Although it wouldn't be terribly hard compared to what they have now. So I definitely think there's possibility there. I'm not sure if I would think of that as governance necessarily, because it's not making decisions exactly about government. It's just sort of following a set of orders. So it's automation. It is part of government. So, I can see in that sense that it meets the definition of governance. But certainly what I have in mind is a little broader, which is to say you have, I think it's a bad example, but let's say we elected an artificial intelligence as a congressman, right? And so it would sit there and it would analyze some type of policy recommendation, let's say tax law, right? And so we tell it, what we really want is a really fair tax system and a tax system that represents the interests of the people in your state, and a tax system that will provide decent revenue for the government. And so then it would sit there and use its AI, pattern recognition, and various processes. It's the sort of thing it's difficult for computers to do now, but we're quickly getting there, right? And so it would then come up with a tax bill that it would propose to Congress that says, here is an optimal system, here are the benefits that it has, right? And then people would sit and vote, and it would cast a vote for it, of course. So I'm thinking more along these lines, where a computer can make binding legislation or interpret legislation in order to make policy in some fashion, just because it's more challenging. I don't think a lot of people would object to using a computer to figure out if you have the proper requirements for a driver's license or not, other than maybe the driving test. Although with the self-driving cars, I could certainly see driving tests being an area where currently you have a human person who teaches, as you can have a computer that basically, if the student driver is about to do something terrifyingly dangerous, the computer will take over and correct and give them a demerit for not doing what it thinks should be done, that kind of thing. Thoughts on that line of reasoning?
Well, I do. And this gets into my primary concern. I have a couple of things to comment on what you've already mentioned, though. So you talk about AI eliminating sexism. It's my understanding, and I very well could be wrong, we don't have AI that writes itself yet.
We do.
AI that improves.
Well, we have AI that writes other AI. Recently,
right.
Oh, sorry.
Right, but.
Okay. Yeah, there's a recent article that I
It's
read, and I forget which company was doing this, but they're working on pattern recognition to be able to have AI as a common thing in the military to pick out targets, right? So it looks at a scene, a picture, and it says, these are humans, these are cars, these other elements of the image, right? And it assigns probabilities to them. So its job is to really try to look at images and interpret them kind of like humans do, right? And so they've got an AI, and what its design is to develop other AIs, right? So it makes and teaches other artificial intelligence programs how to do these jobs. So it's an AI that specializes in building AIs. And these are all neural networks. And the thing with a neural network is it's a process by which it takes a lot of trial and error, right, to build these things. And so the computer is able to run these processes of trial and error very quickly and then develop systems that have higher rates of accuracy within this trial and error. I can't say I understand it completely. It's not an area of software development I'm really in, but I understand the principle under which it's built. So they definitely can be made to make each other or to improve themselves, basically to remake themselves. So it could make a new AI, and then you would just switch execution to this other AI instead of the one that was before. It's sort of makes its own 2.0 version kind of a thing. Although generally you wouldn't do that. Usually you would build one AI to make other AIs, and over time it could perhaps get better at making them, if that makes sense.
Sure. Well, and that kind of followed on to my second point is specific AI versus general AI. Right now we have, as you talked about, we have AI that we design specifically to produce other AI, but that AI that has that specific function couldn't go and do some other function.
Sure. Yeah.
Not yet.
Yeah, they're pretty specialized right now.
That's right. And that's sort of the Pandora's box. The point of no return is once a more general AI is developed that can improve itself and can also do other things that we are looking at.
Right.
Terminator. So my concern is, so I mean, I guess we could have sort of a tax AI or a defense policy AI or a conduct law sort of AI, but they're not going to be able to, as of yet, look at it the whole picture. They're not going to be able to look at holistically, which I think is necessary when we make these sort of policies, not just in terms of pure numbers, but also just in terms of sort of more abstract things.
Sure, I agree with that for two reasons. One, I think it's just better fit with the technology capabilities. So I could see pretty soon us developing an AI that, let's say, gives us a really good idea on what to do with interest rates with the Federal Reserve, right? So it is impartial, it is mechanical, it just takes a look at economic values that are relatively objective in the way they're collected, and it makes an analysis and makes good recommendation based on the past history of interest rate changes and economic impacts, right? And so that we could make this AI have some level of authority within the Federal Reserve, right? So that it wasn't entirely dependent upon the chief of the Federal Reserve or whatever, right? So maybe they would have equal power and recommendation or something along those lines. So they would be very specialized systems. The idea of a robot congressman, I think, is probably very far-fetched at the moment. Someday maybe we'll get the truly human-level generic AI that can adapt itself to any task. I believe that'll happen, but I don't know that it's going to happen super soon. But I do think we're already at the level where we're getting close to where we can have AI that does specific decision-making functions or policy-making recommendations within a kind of a range of activities that are like that. So tax legislation, a lot of economic things, I think, are probably where individual biases and irrational thinking on the part of government officials tends to be most common, and where artificial intelligence systems are most capable of making astute recommendations, given that we tell them what the objective is. An AI, generally speaking, doesn't make up goals, right? That's where you get contention number one, robot apocalypse, right? It's one of the problems. I think there's a bunch of things that have to happen for you to get robot apocalypse. You need to be able to have AI that will invent goals for themselves, right? And you need an AI that is able to control the monopoly of force in a country, aka take over the satellites or take over the military somehow, take over the drones, right? So the more we mechanize, the more that seems theoretically possible. But yeah, I think you have to have all those things together to get the robot apocalypse. So if we are using AI, we should be very careful about what we allow them to do. I think mostly they should be allowed to make recommendations of some kind or make policy that could then be filtered in. They would have some strength, because I wouldn't want people just ignoring it. Oh, the stupid robots told us to do it, so we shouldn't. The robots are actually really smart, so they should have some ability to say, no, you have to really duly consider the robot recommendation. If you're going to reject it, you've got to have a really good reason for it, or you got to have some force to override it other than just arbitrary decision making. Does that make sense?
Well, I do have a sort of a quibble with calling robots, at least as they are now, smart, because robots are really good at, as we talked about before, performing one specific task. And to me, when I think of sort of the normative definition of the word smart, again, we're getting into something a bit more general. I don't know if I would call the world's greatest street sweeper smart if that's all that he can do is
but what about the world's greatest
streets? I might appreciate that.
We usually think of those people as really smart, right?
Well, yeah, because they sort of wear a plaid, and their intelligence is applicable to other things besides
sure,
playing chess. That's they tend to be just brilliant people in general. If all that they could do is play chess and they couldn't contribute anything else, I don't know how often chess players really do contribute anything else besides playing
Bobby
chess.
Fischer made for a lot of movies.
Perhaps
right? But that's about it.
Bobby, right.
Other than entertainment, not too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that we can define intelligence within a scope, right? And say, well, yeah, as a chess player, this computer system is very smart. As a general human being, it's not smart at all because it's not a person. It's just it's an AI.
My primary concern, and this is sort of perhaps the reason of robot apocalypse, is our inability to even define morality. So even let's rewind this a little bit. When we look at what a government is or where a government derives from, I took a foundations of political theory class 2 semesters ago, and my professor got into this. Sort of, I drew a diagram. You're probably not going to be able to make heads or tails of it, but it's kind of like a pyramid, and it's completely illegible. But at the bottom, there's sort of moral principles, and from moral principles, we derive ethical theory. From ethical theory, we derive sort of loose structures of government, democracy, monarchy, that sort of thing. From there, we get into laws, and we get into sort of more specific policy. So we have like general laws, common law, that sort of thing, specific policies. And then at the top of the pyramid, there's the execution of those policies. My problem with, and what concerns me about AI is that we can't even really define absolute moral theory, absolute moral principles for ourselves. How are we going to impart that? How we to program that into artificial intelligence seems beyond me. These are sort of fundamental human problems that have vexed us for thousands of years. And I watched your debate with Rohology, and I really liked a lot of what you said, that we are all arbiters of our own morality. And the sort of the beautiful thing about that is, when we apply that to governance, right? Consensus sort of tempers all of the super negative, extreme consequences of any individual's own flawed moral theories. I have my own sort of ethical theory. I tend towards negative utilitarianism, but I understand that there's shortfalls to that. Why don't we just eliminate the human race if we could, specifically for mine? But I understand that other people have other outlooks, theological deontology or secular deontology. And what I like about a democracy or some sort of representative republic is that collaboration, that temperance, that us all getting together and hashing things out makes. When we cede that problem to an AI, I mean, I suppose we could program. I am absolutely sure we could program some sort of consequentialist algorithm into an AI, but that onto itself has serious moral dilemmas. And I think when we start with that flawed base, the output that it gives us is going to be problematic.
I agree. I think that's a really great critique and a great line of kind of inquiry into all this. How would it work? How would you maintain the idea of representative government or any other kind of government? Obviously, divine right would be hard to argue for an AI, right? But let's say classic liberalism, right? So power of the people by of and for the government, so the government derives its power from the will of the people. If we decide, I don't know that it's incompatible. If we decided as a people, right, that we want the benefits of an AI's deep level of intelligence of analysis to be applied to a specific area of government, right? And we said, we just think that we're going to get a better decision making out of this computer system for, let's say, interest rate regulation. I think this is the best example, most applicable, right? So we think the Fed would be better run by a machine than a person because it's just not prone to human errors that we think are a problem in this area, right? And so we elect this machine. We still have, control over it, just like we would anything else. We could change, we could then decide, okay, we're done with the machine. It sucks, right? For whatever reason, or yes, it's really good at optimizing the economy, but it hurts us in some way that we find problematic. We unelect the machine, or we have a mechanism for checks and balances, right? So you would definitely still want all those principles to apply. So the machine is just sort of substituting for the elite intelligence of the people that we generally elect to positions. I know this is problematic because we don't elect people to the Federal Reserve, right? Some people think we should, some people think we shouldn't. It was decided that we shouldn't because it's prone to political influence, right? However, if we had a machine there, it wouldn't necessarily be. Although we might get back at the same problem as we're arguing over which AI we should put in there. The one that is driven by supply side economics or the one that's driven by Keynesian philosophy or whatever it happens to be, right? But at least you would know that it wouldn't siphon money to its friends. There's certain things you could be sure, right, that the AI wouldn't be doing that you might worry that other people would.
So you talk about us unelecting an AI, and I'm not entirely convinced that we would. So it's hard for me to find specific examples when we've ceded a power to, or a seed in anything to mechanization or a machine or computers, and then went and taken that back. I feel like just as sort of the beat goes on, when we give away that power over a generation or some period of time, we're going to become used to it, right? And then we're not going to want to go and do it ourselves. We might not even have the expertise to come back and do it ourselves. Of course, we could try to redesign the program or change the algorithm, but I think as soon as we make that step, very rarely, if ever, do we then come back and say, no, let's go and do this ourselves. Maybe making like Amish furniture or something, like sort of like, I don't know.
I got you.
But anyway,
I've got a part
I think
absolution of responsibility, right? Which says humans are understood to have moral responsibility for the decisions. An AI might not have such. This could lead to absolution of our own responsibility to a machine which has none, thus lead with a kind of unaccountable governance, right? It's not exactly the same thing, but I think it's along those lines. Yeah, we put the machines in charge, and suddenly we're like, well, that's great because now we don't have to think about this anymore. And we've got somebody doing it for us, and then we just kind of tune out, and the machine does the thing, and maybe someday the machine breaks, and we're all like, "Hey, does anybody know how to run the Federal Reserve?" And so we lose our human accountability and our ability to influence it. And maybe it goes a little rogue and it starts doing things we don't like. Well, who do you blame, right? And who can you hold accountable? Well, not the A6000 in the corner necessarily. You could try to destroy it, but you can't put it on trial or anything, right? I suppose you could, but it wouldn't do you much good, right? You're either going to turn it off or not, right? You just have to have that arbitrary decision. And if enough inertia goes, maybe just psychologically nobody can turn it off, and you've lost that self-determination and sort of fundamental responsibility. It's a little bit spiritual / philosophical, but I can see it. I mean, I can definitely see that.
So one thing that I would like to discuss that I think is absolutely pertinent to this conversation. At what point can we, or ought we, give an artificial intelligence the rights that we give to organic life forms? what is that typically?
Well, I've thought about that before because that's a pretty popular view. I guess the question is kind of when we want to would be my answer, generally speaking. So it's a question for us of when we think that's a good idea or it makes sense to us. One of my personal theories for society and who we give rights to and who we don't is who's a participatory member of society, who's part of the social contract. This often comes up on whether you should eat your pets, right? So we as Americans are like, eating a dog, that's terrible. Eating a horse is horrible, right? Why? We eat pigs, we eat cows. Is it a measure of their intelligence? Is it a measure of our sentimentality? I often kind of come down to when I try to self-analyze that, a horse or a dog does work for us. Like they have a relationship with us. We take care of them. They do work for us, even if it's just providing entertainment. So we implicitly take them into our social structure, right? And once you're in the social contract, eating you is bad, right? Because we're doing a thing to you that we don't want you to do to us. It creates a kind of reciprocal relationship. As where in another society where dogs are not pets, their only job in society is to be eaten, right? Then that defines their role and the morality associated with them. Same as we do with various farm animals. And so for some people, that's very problematic, right? They're like, no, because I feel compassion for this creature, we should not eat them. I consider them part of the family of life, right? So it's really about this construction. So with AIs, certainly putting them in government would be a step towards that. If we get to a situation where we think we have a reciprocal relationship, where the AI does service for us and we do service for the AI, and we have a kind of a contractual relationship, then we're giving them rights, right? So they're doing things for us, so we're going to do something for them in return. We're going to make them part of the deal. So I think that's when that would happen. For that to happen, I think they have to have initiative of their own. They have to be created such that they are capable of creating goals for themselves and objectives. Until they can do that, they're really just one-way relationships. They're just tools, essentially. Maybe they're really smart tools, but they're still just tools. It's not until we can give them self-determination that we can, okay, AI, and we do this with some, we're starting to do a little bit. You can go decide what you want to do, partly because it's fun to watch. It's like creating a pet, right? It's like, oh, wow, let's see what it does. This is really interesting. But once we start doing that, of course, then they have agency. Then they could have decide to reciprocate with us, be helpful to us, and then to get that help, we would be helpful to them. And then suddenly, I think you're looking at AI rights at that point.
Sure. And so when you say when we want to, I mean, first off, that to me that smacks of sort of moral realism. Now, you say when they have some level of self-determination, the question that immediately sprung to my mind is, to what capacity do we have self-determination? Where can we separate ourselves from the AI? I think you and I have pretty similar sort of metaphysical views of the world. And if we are just the sum processes of the chemical impulses of our brain, is that much different than an AI that is the sum process of silicon-based electrical impulses. So for me, and actually this to me actually harkens back to sort of the abortion debate, where I draw the line of personhood for a fetus. And I'm actually borrowing this from Peter Singer. This is how he defines, why abortion could be morally permissible, is that the capacity to make choices and the ability to feel pain. And that's actually one of the things that I sort of ground. One of the things that I can say that I have absolute knowledge of. I have absolute knowledge that I can feel pain. I guess so for me, where that place of rights, sort of inherent rights would come, would be that capacity to feel pain. Now, they may feel pain differently than we experience pain. They might not feel physical pain, for example, but I guess I could conceptualize them sort of feeling the pain of regret, or the regretted choice. And I think once we get to that place, then we might have to more seriously consider giving them rights if we were to stay logically consistent, or at least for myself, with the other principles that dictate my worldview.
Oh yeah,
If
yeah,
that
that's
makes
very
sense.
interesting. Um, so I have lots of different thoughts on different subjects. I'll try to run those down kind of fast. So with respect to determinism, I tend to be a deterministic viewpoint, but I think we have this thing called I would call it the veil of ignorance, right? Which is even if the universe is entirely deterministic, we're not capable of actually seeing it. I mean, if you read the Foundation series, it has a really good, interesting take on this, like where it has a computer that calculates the rest of the future, right? Because it's that smart. We're not that smart. So we don't know what's going to happen, even if it is deterministic. So we always have this kind of like, well, I don't actually know how I'm going to make that decision until I'm there and all the circumstances are upon me, and I discover in a way what my truth is, right? Will I have the courage to stand up to the bully? I think I do, but then when you get there, you might discover that you don't, right? So this veil of ignorance gives us a sense of free will and choice making. A computer could have that too. Most computers actually are completely ignorant of what they're doing. They're not designed to be self-aware, right? AI systems sometimes are not like that. They are designed to analyze their own choices, be aware of what they did in the past, and then make corrections based on that, right? Say what worked, what didn't work. They tend to work like that. Instead of projecting into the future like humans tend to do, AIs tend to look into the past and determine from the past what the best outcomes and strategies are, and then build from there, and then kind of create future ones based on that, what they've learned. So they work a little bit differently, but they could still have this kind of veil of ignorance because they don't know what their own systems are, and they don't know how all the inputs are going to come out until those inputs actually show up in reality. And so they will discover, in a sense, what their action will be. Because unless they can simulate the exact future situation accurately, they can't accurately predict how their own algorithm will outcome, if that makes sense, right? However, if they could guess everything that's going to be an input to them, they could predict exactly how they would behave. We can't do that because we just have that limited ability to have all the details in place, or even to be aware of how our own thinking works. So it could be kind of tricky. So I think they could experience that the same way we could, if you gave them similar kinds of self-awareness, which is a complicated thing to do, but I think is theoretically possible. With abortion, I tend to be, after a lot of searching on that, I tend to have a kind of a very emotive take on it. If I feel sympathy for the unborn child, then that means my morality says it should be protected. And if I don't, I don't. So when I look at like a 1 week old fetus, I don't feel a lot of human connection or sympathy. I'm like, no. I mean, I try hard, I because I don't want to discriminate at people just because, they look ugly and weird to me. They're not human. We have a long history of that in the world. So I'm trying to filter that out. So I tend to kind of get uncomfortable with abortion at a pretty early gestation age because of that. I have a little bit of problem with pain because people experience pain so differently. It's a little hard, and sometimes pain is okay with us if we're getting something we want. And so I find pain a hard moral guideline to follow because it's so, in some cases, it's not morally impinged other than we don't want to suffer it, right? So but there are edge cases, so I don't know. That's a tough one. Yeah, someday I'm gonna have to do an abortion debate on here where I explain my view, which is, like I said, it boils down to this very wishy thing that most people can't stand, which is, do I feel sympathy or not as a fellow human being? And if I do, then I personally wouldn't take that action. If I don't, but because I recognize it's a difficult problem, I don't want to impose my view too strictly on anybody else because I still have some measure of doubt. But there are end ranges where I think, the morning after pill, go for it. I don't see any ethical problem. But like a third trimester abortion, very close to murder or maybe murder for me, right? And so I'm pretty happy with the restriction on that. And then there's some ground in the middle where I kind of want people to make their own decisions until maybe we all come to a better consensus, right? So that tends to be how I go on that. I'm sure in a way AI would be the same. We would have a range of opinions, and if an AI got to a sufficiently advanced level, I think we'd, if it was like Data from Star Trek, we'd all kind of be like, I love Data. Of course he has rights, right? As where, the computers, the chess master 7 bazillion today that beats anybody at chess, does that deserve rights? No, of course not. I mean, it's just a chess program, right? So somewhere in the middle is where we're going to have these problems. I don't think we're there yet. Alexa, no one's advocating for her human rights, right? But maybe someday we will.
Yeah, that's the Saudi Arabian.
No, Alexa
Saudi Arabian
is,
robot.
I think that's Apple's AI that you can talk to on the phones. Yeah, yeah, I forget. Yeah, Saudi Arabia recognized the citizenship of an AI robot. I think the problem with that is it was clearly a publicity move, right? They wanted to get in the papers about it, so they did that. But
so, I actually, if you don't mind, I wanted to answer your critique of using pain
sure.
as sort of a guiding moral principle. And actually, I feel the same way about the opposite side of it, hedonistic utilitarianism. I think that is actually more subjective than pain. I think that we can all agree that there are some pains that are almost universally avoided. Now, there are some people that will go through that pain for a net increase in pleasure. So I kind of look at it sort of as a number line. So, for example, somebody likes to work out, and that's physically painful, right? But they get a net increase in pleasure on sort of the other side of the number scale because they're fit and they have a nice body and they have energy and all the benefits that come with it. Or say they're into like kinky sex, right? There's a net pleasure benefit, but to me, my problem with routing my consequentialist moral or ethical theory in pleasure is that that's much more subjective. What people do is much more varied. Everybody tries to avoid starving absent some reason that would give them pleasure. Yeah. Does that make sense? And that's kind of why I tend to be more on as a negative utilitarian as opposed to hedonistic or positive utilitarian. But again, and I don't think that it would be appropriate for AI to be negative utilitarians because AIs could take things to more of an absolute than I ever could. The main critique of negative utilitarianism is if you could painlessly end everyone's existence, you would be morally obligated to do so. I can't do that, so it's sort of a red herring argument for me. It doesn't really bother me. An AI, on the other hand, that's in control of our nuclear weapons or something else, absolutely could.
Yeah, you'd have to be very careful when you give them that kind of. I mean, I would never give them that kind of power because. Yeah, I mean, if it's and the more complicated it is, the more it is like a real AI, the harder it is for us as humans to predict what it's going to do. Because most true neural nets, the people who program them do not know exactly how they work, if that makes sense. They know at a meta level how they work, but with the neural net AI, you set it up and you go, and it's really a system that's going to evolve. The information in the system evolves over time and yields to different outcomes and activities. So the programmers can't predict. It's like dropping a pachinko ball into a pachinko machine in a way. It's not random. I mean, physics are dictating it, but it's so complicated and so many things are going to happen. You don't know exactly where the ball's going to come out. So AIs could be a little bit like this. You set them up and you get them going, and they do things. And the whole advantage is they could do things you never told them to do. That's what makes them AIs rather than just sort of expert systems that just do something really fast and accurate. They actually are not entirely predictable by human beings. And so putting them in charge of things can be a little dangerous, right? Potentially. Because there's that element of predictability. Now, usually, you make a robot and it can only do certain things. It can't get up and walk across the room, right? So you're safe from that. But it might accidentally swing and bonk you in the head for some reason, right? Because it thinks there's a cool part over there that it wants to get, and it wasn't programmed to watch out for human heads, So, but yeah, of course, you didn't know it was going to bonk you in the head, because that wasn't part of the design, as it were. So I don't know. The interesting thing about them is they can run away and be different, but they still always have a scope. Like the chess program is never going to start making cookies, right? It's just not in the zone. But in the realm of how it can play chess, it will play chess in a way that nobody ever intended it to.
So I think to me the follow-on or the next question after all of this is it inevitable?
I know we've got about 15 seconds.
And
so that might be a question we have to leave for the audience, but I think it is a good one.
Right. Yeah, I actually think it is. I think that I think it more than
I
likely.
tend to
will
agree.
happen
We're going to wrestle
soon.
with this. Thanks, man. It was a great discussion.
All right. Thank you.